The clock had been counting down for nearly 48 hours, somewhere inside the Persian Gulf, its surface eerily quiet save for the distant drone of surveillance aircraft and the creak of tanker hulls riding at anchor, their crews waiting, their captains unwilling to move. A deadline was expiring. Tense President Donald Trump had given Iran until Monday evening to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face something he described with blunt finality: the obliteration of Iran's power plants, its electrical grid, its energy infrastructure. The war, now in its fourth week, had already reduced more than 40 energy facilities across 9 countries to rubble or ash. Size: shipping through the strait, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil and natural gas once flowed freely, had virtually ground to a halt since United States and Israeli forces launched airstrikes on Iran on February 28th. On this Monday morning, the world woke to find that the deadline had not passed in fire and silence. It had passed in a declaration, delivered through a social media post, of something far more unexpected: talks. This was not simply a postponement of a military strike, it was the opening of the most volatile diplomatic gamble of a war that no one appears to know how to end. President Trump, posting on Truth Social early Monday, declared that the United States and Iran had conducted what he described as very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. He followed that post with a phone call to CNBC, telling anchors directly, "We are very intent on making a deal with Iran." Speaking later to reporters at Palm Beach, Trump offered considerably more detail. He stated that his son-in-law Jared Kushner and U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff had met the previous evening with what he called a top person on the Iranian side. According to Trump, the two sides were working through 15 points of potential agreement, with the question of Iran's nuclear program placed, in his words, at number 1, 2, and 3. Trump then announced the consequence. He had ordered the U.S. military to postpone any and all strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day window, subject to the success of negotiations. He suggested the Strait of Hormuz could be reopened very soon if the process moved forward. He even floated the possibility of joint control of the waterway, shared between the United States and Iranian leadership, a formulation he connected explicitly to what he called a very serious form of regime change. The warning embedded in the diplomacy was unmistakable, but the story quickly became far more complicated. Before we break down exactly what Iran is saying about these talks and why the gap between the two accounts carries enormous consequences for the global energy system, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the latest dramatic developments shaping global geopolitics. Iran's response arrived swiftly, and it could not have been more direct in its contradiction. Iran's foreign ministry issued an official statement rejecting Trump's account in its entirety. According to the ministry's own language, "We deny what U.S. President Donald Trump said regarding negotiations taking place between the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran." Iranian state media, citing an unnamed senior security official, went further. According to that official's statement, transmitted on Telegram by Tasnim news agency, "There has been no negotiation and there is no negotiation, and with this kind of psychological warfare, neither the Strait of Hormuz will return to its pre-war conditions nor will there be peace in the energy markets." Iran's state-affiliated Fars news agency stated categorically that there had been no direct or indirect contact between Tehran and Washington. Iranian officials characterized Trump's claim of productive talks as a calculated maneuver, a ploy in their framing to soothe rattled financial markets and to purchase time for additional military action. Iran's foreign minister had previously argued that the reason commercial shipping was no longer transiting the strait had nothing to do with Iranian aggression, but rather with insurance companies' refusal to cover ships transiting a war zone initiated, in Tehran's telling, by the United States. What emerged was not a diplomatic breakthrough, but a collision of mutually exclusive realities. Between these narratives lies a complex reality that analysts are still working to understand. What does the Strait of Hormuz mean for the global energy system? The answer is everything. The strait is a narrow choke point, at its most constricted, less than 40 kilometers wide, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, and beyond it to the broader global shipping lanes that carry crude oil, liquefied natural gas, refined petroleum, and a host of other industrial commodities to markets in Asia, Europe, and beyond. Roughly 1/5 of all oil and gas consumed globally passes through this single corridor. Nations including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar all rely on the strait to export their energy production. Since the conflict began on February 28th, that flow has effectively been severed. Iran has targeted vessels attempting to transit the waterway. Tanker captains have turned off their tracking systems. Insurance coverage has become, in many cases, impossible to obtain at any price. Beyond oil and gas, the closure has interrupted the global movement of petrochemicals, fertilizers, sulfur, and helium, commodities that underpin agriculture, manufacturing, and technology supply chains worldwide. Striking Iran's power plants in this context carried a warning with cascading dimensions. Iran's parliamentary speaker had already made clear that an attack on Iranian power infrastructure would be met with the irreversible destruction of energy facilities across the Gulf region. The International Committee of the Red Cross stated plainly that war on essential infrastructure is war on civilians. The message was clear. To strike Iran's power grid was to risk a retaliatory wave that could permanently cripple the energy architecture of an entire region. The immediate military response to Trump's deadline announcement sent its own signals. Iran had already demonstrated its long-range strike capability, firing 2 ballistic missiles at the joint United Kingdom-United States military base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean on Friday, confirmation provided publicly by British Defense Secretary John Healey on Monday. Neither missile struck its target, but the message was received. In Lebanon, a strike on an apartment building in Hazmi, east of Beirut, killed 1 person, according to Lebanon's health ministry and the state-run national news agency. Israeli military officials stated the strike targeted a member of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which has provided extensive support to Hezbollah in its ongoing operations against Israel. The broader regional picture was one of escalating military contact on multiple fronts simultaneously. That expanding military footprint carries consequences far beyond the immediate battlefield. Regional governments watched Monday's announcement with a mixture of cautious relief and deep skepticism. French President Emmanuel Macron had already held calls with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, pledging France's commitment to Saudi air defense. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz was engaged in parallel diplomatic consultations. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer told senior lawmakers he welcomed any reports of productive talks, while simultaneously stating he was planning on the basis that the war could go on for some time. On global financial markets, the reaction to Trump's announcement was immediate and significant. U.S. stock futures surged. European stocks staged a rebound. Oil prices tumbled sharply on the prospect of a negotiated resolution, a move that illustrated with brutal clarity how dependent global economic stability had become on the outcome of a single diplomatic conversation. Gold and silver, which had surged as safe haven assets during the crisis, pared their gains. That spike in energy prices, however temporary its retreat, had consequences far beyond market indices. The IEA's executive director, Fatih Birol, speaking in Canberra on Monday, stated that the damage already done, more than 40 energy assets across 9 countries severely or very severely damaged, global LNG supply reduced by approximately 20%, was equivalent in scale to the 2 major oil crises of the 1970s and the 2022 European gas crisis combined. The IEA had already released 400 million barrels of emergency oil reserves on March 11th. Birol indicated it was prepared to act again. At home in the United States, the political terrain beneath Trump was shifting. Analysts noted that prominent voices within the MAGA movement had begun speaking publicly against the war. Republicans holding narrow margins in Congress faced a volatile calculation. An Iran war-induced fertilizer shortage was already threatening agricultural communities in farm states critical to the party's midterm performance. Gas prices climbed, consumer costs rose, household expenses surged, and the questions about what precisely the war was designed to achieve and how it would end had not been answered. President Trump maintains that direct negotiations are underway, that major points of agreement have been reached, and that Iran has committed in principle to abandoning its nuclear weapons program. Iran's foreign ministry maintains that no such negotiations exist, that Trump's claims are a form of psychological warfare, and that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed to what Tehran calls aggressors, regardless of what is said in Washington. Both of those statements cannot be true simultaneously. Somewhere in the gap between them sits the actual state of a conflict that has, in less than 4 weeks, produced the largest energy market disruption in recorded history, drawn military fire across 3 continents, killed civilians in Lebanon, and brought the world's major powers to the edge of a much broader confrontation. The fragility of this moment is not captured by any single announcement, any single social media post, or any single denial from a foreign ministry. It is captured in the image of tankers sitting motionless in the Gulf, their crews waiting, their cargoes undelivered, their captains unwilling to move, and because no one, on any side of this conflict, has yet provided a credible answer to the only question that matters. Will this 5-day window represent the first genuine step toward ending a war that has already exceeded everyone's expectations for devastation, or is it the beginning of something far larger? Stay tuned for further updates as this situation continues to develop, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss the latest dramatic geopolitical developments shaping the world.